Hi y'all, today we're going to be going over how to add parameterization to your flows and create deployments. We're going to expand on the already existing ETL web to GCS Python script that you've already built in the previous modules. So let's go ahead and create a new file here and call it Parameterized Flow. So Parameterized _flow.py. If you're following along with the GitHub, you can see this under the flows folder and the 03 deployments folder already. And so we're going to go ahead and just copy over that ETL web to GCS file. So I'm just going to copy the whole file here and place it in here. Go ahead and save that. So we're going to be transforming this now to include parameterization. And what that really means is allowing your flow to take parameters so that when we actually schedule this, it's not hard-coded anymore, the color, the month, the year. Rather, we can actually pass those on at runtime. And so your flow could have multiple flow runs, instances of that flow with different parameters that affect how the output the output of the file ends up being. So the first thing that we're actually going to do is put those parameters into our main flow. So let's go ahead and add year, int, month, also an int, and color, which is a string, right? And so we can go ahead and remove those parameters from this flow. And so now actually let's make this flow into a subflow. So for example, instead of just hard coding 1 month at a time for each flow run, let's create a parent flow that's going to trigger this flow maybe 3 times for 3 different months. So we get 3 instances of our single flow, all from one parent flow. So let's go ahead and create a parent flow. So at flow, def ETL parent flow. And let's actually pass in months as a list. And you know, I'm just gonna go ahead and copy this over in code really quick so that you can see it instead of watching me type this out. So what we're going to do is we're actually going to pass months as a list, an integer list. And for example, it'll default to 1 and 2. The year is going to be 2021 and the color is going to default for yellow here. Now in the function, we'll just do a for loop over the months and we will call this for each month here. All right, so now that we have our parent flow, we need to change our if name equals main to actually be that parent flow as well that we are calling. And we can pass in maybe some different parameters here. So maybe we say color equals still yellow for now, but maybe our months equals more than just 1 and 2. Maybe it's 1, 2, and 3. And our year we can keep with 2021 here. All right, so now we've got months. Is it months? Yep, months, year, color. Make sure those are in the right order. Awesome. Okay, so just also for good measure, let's go back up to the top in our fetch. We already have retries here for the data set, but let's make sure we just add that cache key function as well. So in order to do that, let's take our import here from task, prefect task, right? And let's go ahead and add in the delta time as well up at the top and get that cache key function as well. So we are taking that cache key function. It's going to take that task input hash and also do an expiration of 1 day here. And we're really doing this for when we're reading that data set so that we're not having to reread multiple data sets if we already have those in there. All right, so let's go ahead and run this flow now that we've actually turned it into a subflow. And just a reminder, this is building upon that ETL web to GCS flow that we already built. That flow does include utilizing that GCS block. We do already have Orion, the API and UI running. So if you are missing any of those steps, you should go back to the previous videos and make sure you have that bucket in GCS that we're going to put the data into, and make sure you've got your Prefect Orion start as well. All right, so let's go ahead and run this flow. And we can see we've got some data being picked up, some data being cleansed. We've got our different flow runs happening as well. And looks like everything finished in a completed state. If we were go over to our Orion UI, right, we're going to see that tireless jackrabbit and see all of that output as well, along with any subflows. And actually, the parent flow would have those 3 subflows. Tireless jackrabbit is that subflow of the single month. All right, so next, from this point, we've only been triggering flow runs in the terminal. And so what we want to go ahead and do is be able to use a deployment inside Prefect, or a Prefect deployment, to make sure that we can trigger and schedule these flow runs and not have to do this manually anymore. So a deployment in Prefect is a server-side concept that encapsulates a flow, allowing it to be scheduled and triggered via the API. So far we're interacting with the API, sending flow runs, right? It's giving out the states and the logs back to Prefect, the API. But using a deployment, we're going to be able to have our flow code, a deployment definition, and that deployment definition we're going to send over to Prefect API. So Prefect will now know that, hey, there's a flow. Maybe it runs on a schedule. Maybe it needs to be run with, certain infrastructure, Kubernetes, or on Docker, ECS. Maybe the flow code itself is not stored locally on my machine anymore. Maybe it's stored in GitHub or again, Docker, S3, lots of options. But that deployment definition is going to be able to tell Prefect what to expect for these scenarios. You can also have multiple deployments for a single flow. So now that we have one flow code, our flow file here, we might have 2 deployments. One deployment scheduled to run with yellow as our color, another deployment scheduled to run with green, something like that. So we're gonna go ahead and build a deployment. And in order to build a deployment, there's 2 main ways to build a deployment. One is through the CLI, which is what we'll do today. And in a future video, Jeff will walk through how to build a deployment with the Python as well. You can also create a deployment using Python. So when you build a deployment, you actually have a lot of options you can give through the CLI. Again, you give it a name, you can give it a tag, you can give it a work queue, what the output is, that infrastructure, storage, schedule, cron, interval, R rule. And you can even say --apply to automatically apply the deployment after it builds. We're gonna walk through both individual steps of deployment build and deployment apply. So in our terminal, let's go ahead and actually run the deployment command. So this is Prefect deployment, you can already see the apply one, build, and it's going to be the file name here, and then the entry point to the flow. So we have 2 flows in this file, right? We have what ETL web to GCS or ETL parent flow. So we need to tell it what the entry point flow is, and it's ETL parent flow here. And then we want to give it a name. So let's go ahead and build this deployment. All right, you can see this deployment was successfully built. Everything is green. And what that actually did is it placed an ETL parent flow deployment YAML here. This is all of that metadata, right, that the deployment needs to know, that the workflow orchestration tool needs to know in order to start orchestrating. And we've got the name, we could add a description, work queue, we'll get to that in a minute as well, and parameters. Now our flow does take parameters. I didn't pass any in here, but we can go ahead and edit it here, or we could change the parameters on the UI as well. But I'm just gonna go ahead and grab the parameters that I want here and just go ahead and edit them here. So, oops, I duplicated. It's going to be just like that. We're gonna set the color to be yellow. We're gonna have 3 months and the year to be 2021 here. So I'm gonna go ahead and save that deployment. And now when I do the apply, it is another CLI command. So prefect deployment apply, and then we're passing it the name of the YAML file. This tells it to actually send all of the metadata over to the Prefect API so that Prefect now knows we're scheduling, we're orchestrating this flow, and here's how it's going to be orchestrated. All right, let's go ahead and run that. And you can see we have a successfully loaded deployment just created. You can go to the UI to see that deployment. And it also tells you that in order to start executing flows, you need an agent. And I'll get to that in just a minute. So if we go back to our flows, we can see our newly created deployment. Over here, we can see the deployment is turned on. We've got some additional metadata. We could quick run or do a custom run, but we can also just dive right into this. So you can, again, add a description that could have been given in the YAML as well, but we could do that right here. We can edit this deployment and say, Zoomcamp deployment, right? We could change that work queue, we could give it a tag, we could add a schedule, and we could change those default parameters as well. So lots of stuff you can do from here. You can see all the recent runs and what parameters this is going to run with as well. You can see the defaults and the overrides. All right, from the top, we have run. So we could create a quick run or custom run is being able to modify those parameters for each individual run. Remember, a run is an instance of our flow, right? Every time we actually ran the flow file, that's a flow run here. So let's go ahead and trigger a quick run, and we can go in and view this quick run. This was triggered from the UI, and it's in a scheduled state. The reason it is in a scheduled state is because Prefect knows that it's ready to be run, but we don't know where. We have no agent picking up this run. So if we go over to work queues, so work queues and agents, this is a concept for Prefect where an agent is a very, very lightweight Python process, and it is living in your execution environment. In our case right now, we're just running on our local, right? So we will start our agent here on our local, and that agent is pulling from a work queue. You have multiple work queues. You can pause all of the work scheduled in these work queues. And again, the deployment specifies where we want this to run by sending it to a work queue, right? We've got our default work queue, and you can change what work queues you want this to run. This is really great, especially if you've got, maybe you want to run some on certain servers. Maybe you have a cloud deployment as well. So you would set up an agent on that cloud deployment in Kubernetes, for example, while you still have maybe a local one and something on like another server. And you can dictate what work goes where. So let's go over to our work queue. It actually shows us what our upcoming runs are, any history of our runs, but we can actually just click this command, and we're going to go ahead and start our agent here. All right, right away we can see our agent is running, and it actually just completed that flow run super quick. So if we go in and click here, oh, it's running, it's not completed. So you can see that we are actually now running our flow code. and we are triggering it from the API using a deployment. All right, let's see. We can see our parent flow. Again, you can see the running state of what is going on here as it is actively running with the agent. The agent has picked up that flow run as well. Okay, once this finishes, this is going to succeed. But in the case that it were to fail or succeed, we should probably set up a notification. Now that we can trigger our flow runs through deployments, no longer having to do that manually, we can set them on a schedule. We can use an agent to orchestrate where in the execution environment the flows are going to run. We will want to set up a notification. So if you go to the UI, you can go ahead and create a notification, and this is based on the state. So this could be, failed, crash. Crash is if the infrastructure, the execution environment, so where that agent lives, if that were to fail and cause a failure there. For example, you ran out of memory. That would be a crash state. So you know that something is wrong with your infrastructure, not necessarily your flow. So we might just do if something fails, right? And you can do it based on tag, right? You saw there was the ability to add tags to a deployment. You can say, hey, for this tag, which could relate to specific deployments, I want a Teams hook or a web hook or a Slack web hook, right? So we could set up a Slack web hook here and send a notification here. Now there's a couple other ways you can do notifications, not just through the UI. There's a collection. You could do that in your code, hard-coded in there, using blocks as well or collections. But this is how you would create a notification. Let's just type in a random thing and we'll hit create. So now I've got a notification for if any flow enters a fail state, it's going to send a Slack notification. And you can turn these on and off as well or delete them. All right, so that is parameterization, being able to trigger flow runs from deployments and executing them with an agent pulling from that work queue. I will see you guys in the next video.